Hey everyone, it's Kong. Welcome back to Ancient Beckoning School featuring Professor Qtaru. This is the lecture on Fenrir, the second boss in the Ancient Beckoning cycle. In this lesson, Professor Q is going to cover basic strategy and approach to the boss, as well as several alternative characters you can use if you don't have some of the specific meta heroes that he uses. One thing to note, if you're used to normal Kong videos, which are short and snappy and straight to the point, this video is long. Personally, I do recommend watching the whole thing, but I understand that not everyone has an hour and a half to set aside to watch someone walk through and explain a whole battle. So, to give you a little bit more freedom and flexibility, I've included some timestamps in the description below, and you can also see them along the little timer bar at the bottom of the YouTube video. Anyway, let's jump right into the lesson.
Alright, so today's menu is Fenrir. So there's my current score, almost 18 million. It's got room for improvement. My team here, my burn is 5 stars. So once he gets up to 6, that'll be an improvement. Other than that, I'm not entirely sure who else on this team I'd be changing out yet. I might be considering replacing Renata here with Alti, or especially SP Altmuller, once that comes out, and he's 6 stars. But my Alti's not there yet, so I'll be going over this party that I used. Now, most people, one thing I should mention is that I'm using Arianrhod, which is not necessarily that common. Most people are used to using Varna in this fight, but I find Arianrhod performs the same role but better. So, we'll go over that. Alright, so for the team, Bozel is a main AoE DPS, along with Arian. You want to run these 3 AoEs. Now, I'm running him with the clock set, and I think, I'm not certain it's the best. It might actually be better to go for full-on stats with 2+2 blue, but clock set's what I've got. Also, he's better off in his dark class for the higher stats. Assuming you have the resources invested into his dark class. Now, as far as his equipment, instead of Miracle Staff, I actually use a Blue Moon for the extra magic defense. So I'm taking this one off Egbert because it's got a 4% magic defense enchant on it. Obviously, his unique is pretty good. I'm using Tierra because of the, like, compared to Soul Stealer, it's an extra 5% magic defense. And then for accessory, I use Veil of Light, so I've got a clock one here. It's got a really nice beefy enchant on it. So that's what my Bozel looks like for this fight. Soldiers, he doesn't really have any soldier choices that matter. I kind of just go with... I go with Sorceress just because they have lower HP, so they're easier for Juggler to heal back to keep Bozel at 100% HP for his extra Tierra stats. Let's see. Got Yulia here. I run her as infantry again because it's bulkier than her holy class. I bring Godly Menace and Holy Justice, and I use them to provide an extra debuff on even phases when needed. And besides that, I also run this Magic Defense Break on her for 50-50 shot at some extra damage, both for her and also, more importantly, for Bozel's AoEs. Equipment, I run Dimensional Jewel, Queen Scepter, Mirror Armor, and this tier. It's kind of like the same as Well, I don't know. I think Fury of Tyr isn't necessarily needed because, like, you're attacking every turn with her. So Aeneas would give her more bulk, but I have a really nice enchant on this tier, so I'll be sticking with this. As far as enchant, you could go full clock enchant to maybe be able to spam some of these skills more often. But I'm just going 2+2 red for the highest stats. So that's what her stats end up looking like on my account. Now, I guess instead of Queen Scepter, you could also be using the Gift of Eternal Life for more healing. You could also use like Gate of Truth for a similar magic defense increase to a fully maxed Queen Scepter that's not HP based if you don't have Queen Scepter. Gift of Eternal Life would provide a little bit of utility and healing after the attack, but that's honestly not really needed that much, so I prefer having the extra 10% int from Queen Scepter. Alright, so we got Bozo and Yulia. Let's see, next member of my team here is going to be Juggler. So Juggler, I just run a pretty standard Juggler build. Technically, I believe he's better in his Cavalry class than his Aquatic, but I'm just keeping him in his Aquatic because I don't really have his Cavalry class built up yet. In terms of skills, you bring Beast Shock, you bring Battle Cry for debuffs, and then you bring this Magic Defense command to increase Bozel's output. It's also important for soldiers, you want Hellhounds, because the extra damage buff they provide, or debuff, is very, very nice. And you should have Juggler's unique helm if you're using Juggler, but you want his unique because it heals the troops back up after you attack, so you always get the Hellhound debuff off. Alright, Renata. This might look strange to people who do use Renata. Why is she in her Lancer class instead of her Flyer class? And the answer to that is because I'm actually doing a crit-based Renata. Her Lancer class has something like 60 skill over her Flyer class. So even though it has lower base attack, with this, she ends up with 22% crit rate, which is going to become 44% once you get the Ancient Beckoning stat bonus. Then her enchant gives an extra 7%, so that's 51. And then the success rate is 14, so she ends up with a 65% crit rate. So it's not like a super duper nice 100% crit rate. But with Blazing Sun, she does end up doing a lot of damage, and 65% isn't bad. So in terms of gear, you obviously want her unique gear because it gives her this 15% damage reduction each time her talent is triggered. And it makes her debuffs last longer too. Now, in terms of weapon choice, you have her two best weapons here are the Scarlet Reaper, or actually Yggdrasil Branch. Fenrir, I'll show it once we actually get to the fight proper, but out of all the Ancient Beckoning bosses, Fenrir has the highest defensive stats. So I did some calculations, and Scarlet Reaper is better on early in the fight, and Yggdrasil Branch gets better on later on in the fight. The thing is, according to what I calculated, Scarlet Reaper is going to be better than Yggdrasil Branch unless you manage to the fight lasts for like 60 turns, which it doesn't. So Reaper ends up being better overall. But if you don't have a spare Reaper, but you do have a spare Yggdrasil Branch, you might consider the branch instead. Another reason why I went with Lancer class is if you look at the heart bonds. Right here, her Lancer class gets a 10% damage buff when battling a debuffed unit, and Fenrir is always going to have debuffs in this fight. Whereas her Flyer class, Fenrir would have to have a higher HP percentage than you, which is not likely. So her Lance class also gets an extra 10% damage bonus that way. But if you don't have her Lancer class invested, I do believe she would also be pretty good running as Flyer with Scarlet Reaper or Yig Branch. But in that case, I would not be running a crit build. I would be going with like a 2+2 red. You'd be using her Unique Helm, Last Rites, and an 8% attack accessory with whatever best enchant you have. Alright, Arianrhod is my other AoE DPS unit. So in terms of skills, I don't run her 3C. Actually, I run these two skills, which have a low enough cooldown that you can cycle them back and forth. And then I run Armor Pierce. She doesn't end up using Armor Pierce all that often in the fight, just due to the nature of being an AoE DPS instead. So I have thought about doing it like this, where you have like her 3C, and then you can alternate between these two if you want. The thing is that both these skills are 0.35 AoE, whereas this one is a 0.25 and her 3C is a 0.44. So here you're losing like 0.1 compared to total destruction, but 3C is only a gain of 0.9 over it. So in my opinion, this is actually going to lose out a little bit compared to just running these two. And then you can run Power Stab. In terms of equipment, I go 2+2 red, so I go with Scarlet Reaper, an attack accessory, and then you want tier on her. So I'm going to just equip her for the maximum attack possible. So we're going to go 2+2 red. Because she gets like damage reduction from her talent and also from her talent stacks, she doesn't need defensive stats quite as much. So this is what my Arianrhod looks like. 555 is a pretty nice.
Very nice.
Like, her defense isn't that great, her HP plus isn't that great. But with the damage reduction, she'll end up being fine. And then there's one more unit, I believe. Oh yes, Bernhardt. My Bernhardt's still 5 stars. I'm working on him. But this is skill set. I don't actually use Sword Dance very much. But at the moment, he doesn't really have any other really useful skill. You just want to bring Rupture and Hegemony. And it's not like Sunshade is going to do anything for his output. So I just usually leave him on Sword Dance. Anyway, just in case it's needed. It's not usually when you have Renata. Now, in terms of equipment, as an infantry, he gets to bring Crystal Stinger, which is nice. Once an attack accessory. Because he's using Crystal Stinger, I often consider bringing Insidious Pendant because it increases crit rate. It adds base skill, so this is actually going to be even more crit rate. It's going to be about plus 7%, and you get 5% here. Then this enchant is also 5%, so this is like an instant plus 17% crit rate for him. Not that burn is particularly high crit rate here, but like you're gonna get the benefit of the defense ignore from Stinger, and it also increases crit damage. So going for the crit is pretty good. And again, I like running 2+2 for the maximum stats. Again, Fenrir has the highest defense out of any Ancient Beckoning boss, and that stacks up quickly because of how their stats increase. So this is how my burn looks. He's kind of a little bit low on the bulk side in terms of enchants. So that's why I'm picking this Fury of Tyr. I have another tier with Leonhardt. It's got a little bit more attack, but it's got no base HP, so I chose this one for the HP enchant on it. It's another thing about the Insidious Pendant. It doesn't have any base HP, so although it is all stats increased by 5%, it does leave him a little bit more frail than like a Slayer's Emblem would. With Renata, I usually bring these two attack skills and rage scale just for a little bit of extra damage when attacking. Now, the way I use them in the fight is I don't actually use them right away. I wait until like her talent is up and she's hit Fenrir with her debuff that gives 40% damage, and then I'll use her attack skills. Now, if I wasn't using this, I might actually consider going having like 3 attack skills. That way I have a 1.2, 1.5, and a 1.5, and then with 3-round cooldown, it's slightly too long. I can't just like spam a skill every turn. If these were 2-round, you could go and use a skill every turn, but this you end up having a turn of downtime, so that's one reason why I'm doing it like this with oh, there it is, with these 2 attack skills and then the rage scale. Her troops, I'm using gargoyles. You could use orc berserkers, I think, but they have a lower base here, like 677, as opposed to the gargoyles 754. So gargoyles get a 30% increase, and orc berserkers have a 45% increase, but due to the doubling of the base stat, gargoyles are going to have higher attack. And I think that's pretty important because like I mentioned, if you look at his defense starts at 800, whereas most other AB bosses start like the mid 500s. So his defense stacks up rather quickly. So you want to have as much base attack as possible usually. So that's why I go gargoyles with her instead of orc berserkers. For Bernhardt, werewolves are best. Bozo, I think I already mentioned. Sorceress, he doesn't really do like physical attacks, but I'm running Tiara on him, which is based on him having 100% HP, so it's easier to heal sorceresses back up to full as opposed to crystal warlocks or another choice. So that's why I run sorceresses. Juggler, obviously you want the Hellhounds for the debuff. Arianrhod is going to do like 1 attack at the start. And Amazon champions are like some of her best offensive troops, so I run her with Amazon champions. Yulia, I go with masked maids for the 45% bonus when attacking. Like, you don't really have a lot of self buffs, so that kind of puts zealots at a disadvantage because they need her to have buffs. Now, unicorns, they have like a slightly higher base, and they do magic damage. The issue is that they don't get to benefit from their talent because there's no forest mountain or grassland tiles here. So that's why I run her with masked maids. Alright, I think that about covers it. So let's go into the actual fight strategy now. Alright, as you're probably already aware, the goal is you deal debuffs to Fenrir, and then that activates all these tiles. And then you want to, it's most effective to use this AoE tile here. So you cycle it between Bozal and Arianrhod. And then they take turns going back and forth. One launches an AoE, the other picks up the tile buff, and then the next turn, that character will launch the AoE, and then the other picks up the tile buff. And the goal is, if you can take out Fenrir in 2 turns, there's actually 2 different tile buffs based on even and odd phases, and they do stack. So if you can 2-turn Fenrir, you end up always being able to AoE with a double buff. And that's a cycle you want to start and then maintain throughout the fight for as long as possible, because it does more damage that way. Alright, so with Juggler, I like saving Beast Shock for the even phases, because on odd phases, you need 4 debuffs, whereas even phases, you need 6 debuffs. So to play it safe, I like saving Beast Shock for the start of even phases. And I also tend to do that as well with Godly Menace and Holy Justice. So you just open up with Juggler, you get the Battle Cry, and you get his damage debuff. Then you just melee attack with Burn. Now, Burn Aura counts as a debuff now. So between Battle Cry and the Hellhounds, that's all you need for the even phases. So even phases are very easy.
Odd phases, right?
Yeah, odd phases. Alright, this turn, I actually attack with Arianrhod because he's not picking up the tile, even though that means Yulia doesn't get to attack. And the reason for that is because, for some reason, Arianrhod seems to gain 2 stacks of her talent right away when you do this.
Okay.
So you see, she's already got 2 stacks.
And
Yulia just stands around. Right now, again, she doesn't have her talent for extra 40% damage up yet, so I don't use an attack skill with Renata. So I just melee. Now Bozal goes and picks up the AoE buff. Alright, now Arianrhod has her full talent up, which does just allow her to reach this tile. Now, if I had not attacked with her, I would have had to position her over here, otherwise she would not be able to reach. But because she got 2 talent stacks from being able to attack, now she's able to basically run from anywhere and hit this tile. So again, it's going to be the same pattern. We're going to open up with Juggler, get Battle Cry plus the Hellhound debuff. And then
pattern
we're going
in
to
this
go
fight is very satisfying.
Yeah. And then we're going to... Next attack is going to be with Bernhardt for the hegemony to add an extra 10% over what Battlecry does for the defense. All right, now I'm going to be able to use her 3C here because it's got this 40% damage from Renata buff. So hopefully we get a crit and this will be some satisfying numbers. Yep, 100,000 damage is pretty nice. All right, now we're going to have Bozel move into range of the magic defense command aura. And he's going to launch out a nice little earthquake. ND crit, which is also very nice. Like, if I could get crit on its accessory, I'd like that. Like, it's not as important as like high magic defense, but he's only got like a 24% crit rate here. So if you could bump that up to 40%, it's gonna average out to be a nice damage increase throughout the whole fight. Now, I actually... Never mind. I was thinking it would be nice if Yulia's magic defense break had applied before Bozel, but I had to move Bozel off the tile so Arianrhod can move up.
Right, that's so like a first turn quirk. Because for the rest of your cycle, Arianrhod's not going to be in Yulia's way.
Yeah. I was just a little bit damage short from finishing off. It would have been ideal if I had finished Fenrir off that turn. Then I could have started the 2 cycle with Bozel a little bit earlier. No crit was slightly unfortunate for Renata.
Can definitely see those AoEs are where the real business is.
Yep, now that's even phase, I like opening up with Beast Shock. Because the movement down aura also counts as a debuff. So now I need one more, which I use a skill on Yulia to provide. Now, hopefully she'll also be able to get one from Magic Defense Break, but that's a 50-50 shot. Okay, we did get Magic Defense Break, which is also going to benefit Bozel. All right, on this phase, we also have these wolves who spawn. And I do want to mention that if you get clocks on Bozel, which is the utility of using clock in this fight, there's going to be, like, next turn, this wolf is going to run in and, like, AoE right here. And what that means is that if you get clocks, you'll be able to AoE with Bozel using Black Hole or Earthquake and manage to hit Fenrir at the same time as you're going to get the tile buff. So that's how clock can increase damage, but if you don't get clocks, then you don't get to do that. Alright, now that he's attacked, he's got extra debuffs from Renata. So Renata making sure that you get the debuffs up on this second turn extremely easy. Right now, Arianrhod, as you can see, has 2 AoE buffs. So if she gets a crit here, this is going to be some absolutely massive damage. Oh, unfortunately, no crit. All right, now Bozel also has double AoE buff, so he's going to be able to go in and do massive damage. This is now the 2 cycle that I was talking about earlier.
Right.
So as long as you can keep taking them out in 2 turns, you'll just be able to keep getting double buffs, and that's going to keep your damage up higher. Alright, we got the magic defense break, which is nice. And this is basically how the fight goes. So I'll probably continue for a little bit, and then I'll start talking about other characters you can use.
Oh, good idea.
Strategies with them.
Yeah, especially since there are a lot of people, I think, who will still be relying on Varna instead of Arianrhod.
Yeah, I can demonstrate how to use Varna as well. I was actually going to show off ulti as well, instead of Renata.
Mm-hmm.
So here, Fenrir's already wiped out before Arian has even AoE'd. Alright, there's a nice. That's what I want to see. Alright, now that we've seen the 400k, that's good enough.
So that cycle starts to break down when basically
when you
Juglar can't keep everyone healed up, or?
I think, like, on this run, I survived to, like, mid-40s or so. The issue is not so much the healing as, once you drop the 2 cycle, you have to eat that, second turn AoE.
Right.
Which is, an 0.4. And especially, something else I failed to mention is that Fenrir is the only world boss with skill, so that gives him crit rate. So he can end up critting your characters and just killing them outright. But this World Devourer hurts a lot more than Trembling Howl.
Mm-hmm.
Alright, so most commonly used instead of Arianrhod, I believe Arianrhod is better. But the most commonly built used AoE unit is Varna. So with Varna, obviously you do want to use Scarlet Reaper. You're going to want a Last Rites. You're going to want a King's Crown. And then you're also going to want an attack accessory. So if I were using Varna, this is what my Varna would end up looking like. In terms of skills, she's got 2 AoEs and aim, which is necessary. And with this setup, you're able to AoE with her every turn. Now, what she cannot do is she cannot take advantage of the double buff situation, but the benefit of her is that she does get to AoE every turn. The issue is, the reason why Arianrhod is better is because Arianrhod gets the attack and damage buff from her talent. Let's see. Altmuller. It's up somewhere. Alright, Altmuller, I think you'd also want to be using... Now, if you're not using Renata, you might want Alti to provide some debuffs, so you might consider... If you have like a Peacemaker built, you might consider using that. But I'd also be going with Scarlet Reaper. Or potentially Yggdrasil Branch, but I think Reaper is better on him relatively than Yggdrasil Branch, even when compared to how it bounces out for Renata. And the reason for that is because the higher base attack of an axe is going to have more effect with his talent stacks, providing extra attack stats. So I guess I'm just going to take off Ares here. He's also going to want some last rites. And you could probably run his unique. I don't happen to have his unique with the right enchant because I'm building him more for Sleipnir right now. But you could take like a Jorm's Eye to have a 50-50 chance of like another debuff. So I might run him with gear like this. Now the skills, you want to bring his 3C skill, Raging Thunder and Gale. Now his SP class, I think, is going to be better for this fight once you get that unlocked, because I believe his SP class allows him to get up to 6 talent stacks once you start killing enemies, and this is one of the world bosses with guns, so he gets to take advantage of that. Now with Alti, you actually want to run him on the right side, I believe. And you're going to want to run him with bats for sustain because he'll attack multiple times. And you don't really have a healer to keep him healed up, so he needs the bats to stay healed up. And in this cycle, I would have Varna up here because she's going to be the one to grab the tile buff on the first turn. For the reason that she can use aim to grab the buff and then start off with an AoE right away from turn 1. I'm just thinking now, if we have it like this, I guess Alti can go and attack from the top at the start, but then it's going to get weird. Okay, have Varna over on the right and have Juggler up top. All right, this is the formation we want.
Yeah, that looks good.
Alright, so let's just hurry this up. I make the mistakes here, so hopefully you remember not to.
Exactly.
Anyway, the thing with Varna is she does get the benefit of you being able to use aim on this tile and then AoE right away. And then, because she has King's Crown, you can go ahead and give a nice 20% damage buff to a DPS as well. Right now it's Bozel's turn to grab the buff. Now, unlike last time, this actually was able to, because she was able to AoE on turn 1, it enabled me to take him out right away. So that's another slight advantage to Varna, but overall, as the fight goes on, what Arianrhod does in terms of damage is going to outclass Varna, in my opinion. Or maybe I should say in my experience.
Varna will definitely get you to an S rank, though.
Yes. Mostly I just want to get the wolf spawns so I can just demonstrate Alti getting to take advantage of his act again. And there's Gale coming in for some extra damage. Alright, now normally I would be placing Varna down here to ensure the King's Crown buff on Alti, but in this case that would cause this wolf run forward, melee attack her, and end up destroying itself. So instead of that, I'm actually going to move her up here, even though it means she might King's Crown Juggler instead. Alright, this also lets me mention one other thing that I found slightly annoying when I tried Alti in this fight. Is that doing this strat does have a negative consequence for my Bozel.
Oh, it means you can't use the wolves as a AoE target?
No, it does. It's because Juggler is not on the right-hand side, so when this wolf AoEs...
Oh, I see.
What's going to end up happening is that my Bozel is not going to have the Tiara buff anymore. So he's losing 15% int. So if you're running this comp with Alti, I would recommend not running Tiara because now he's lost a little bit of his stats. Yeah, now that the wolf is here, his 3C allows him to act again as long as there's another enemy within one ring. I believe that's the requirement. Yeah, 2 or more enemies within 1 ring. So now you can use his 3C. And he gets to act again. So it's about like once every 5 turns, every 6 turns or so. It allows ulti to get an extra attack in.
Nice.
And of course, this is Bozel's turn to AoE, but if it were his turn to retreat in AoE and you did get a clock, having a wolf in this position would allow him to be able to AoE and hit the boss. So that kind of works out.
So other than Varna and Ulti, are there any other common character substitutions or weird character substitutions that you could think of that might work or might not work in this fight?
All right, let's talk about single target DPS first. So instead of Yulia, another common choice is Lana. If I can find my Lana here. Now, what Lana can do is she can bring Dark Reaper, she can bring Lightning Strike, and very typically she is brought with Magic Defense Intimidate to ensure a Magic Defense debuff after she acts. Now, in terms of equipment, usually she gets run with Astaroth plus her unique gear for the guaranteed 15% end bonus and extra debuff. Then you could probably best to run her with a Dimensional Jewel for the chance of like reducing cooldowns on her attack skills. And then Tenyo's headdress, pretty good for the chance of giving a random useful buff. Also has base HP. You could try Charon, like if you don't happen to have a juggler with Hellhounds, maybe the 15% damage buff would be useful. Soul Stealer would be a chance of a silence debuff if you need to provide more debuffs. Or you could use the Witch Hat if you want to, like, maybe buff the crit rate of one of your allies just a little bit. But in general, I would recommend going with Tenyo. So that's how I would gear her and use her skills. Let's see. Licorice, we'll talk about Licorice when we talk about AoE characters. Listel, if you are really desperate for debuffs like I was once a long time ago, I ran her with this set. She wasn't being used for AoE damage. I used Siphon as a single target strike, and then these two for debuffs. Now, the thing with Mind Bore is it does give enemy magic damage taken up by 20%. So it's actually very nice to combo with Bozel's AoE. But Listel is not the strongest character to use, but she is an option if you're desperate for debuffs, because she has her talent debuff. You could even bring Lava Titans if you wanted, though they're not her most offensive troops. Her troop bonuses are not offensive, though. I really don't recommend her. I just used her a long time ago before they had the update where Burn Aura counted for debuffs, because it was harder to get debuffs back then.
Mm-hmm.
Other single target characters. Renee, she doesn't have, like, she gets 15% increase, but it's not quite as useful as the damage increase, so she doesn't perform quite as well as Lana does, even though you could go with, like, Annihilation. And you also have Dark Matter for another unique debuff. I would run her like this for skill sets. If you wanted to, you could also run her with, like, Calamity Throw and Decay to be able to alternate as, like, an AoE character. Like, her talent doesn't work for AoEs at all, so she's honestly kind of bad to use as an AoE damage dealer. So if I were to use her, I'd be using her Dark class for higher stats, and this as a single target damage dealer and debuffer. But even with Annihilation, reducing the magic defense, even so, she still ends up with Annihilation only doing about as much damage as Lana or Yulia do with her regular attack.
Okay.
So she's usable, but she's not the top tier option. Okay, Ashram. He does get kind of a benefit from his 3C, allowing him to use it every single turn. The problem that Ashram has is to get attack bonus, he needs to move. And the way the team setup kind of is, it's sort of difficult to be able to move him before attacking very much, because everyone's sort of tied down to melee in their own spot.
Right.
And he only has one long cooldown AoE, so even though this is a strong AoE, he's not really useful as an AoE DPS. But if you were to use Ashram, I'd recommend bringing his 3C, maybe a low cooldown, like Shadow Assault skill, and then maybe Blast, or you could go with Attack Break. And Werewolves would be his best soldier choice. Betty is, she would be potentially great for one thing, but unfortunately the fixed damage tile buff only buffs your fixed damage while you're in battle. So her talent fixed damage doesn't get any benefit from it. So she only does like 10,000 fixed damage after the wolf AoEs.
Mm-hmm.
And she's not a very high offensive unit. Also, this Blade Storm, her 3C, it does a minus 15% damage dealt. But it only lasts one turn, so the wolf AoEs, she does the damage dealt decrease debuff. And then it considers the wolf's turn as ending afterward.
Oh,
so the debuff doesn't even stick around. So it doesn't even allow her to debuff the boss with it like that. So just the way this boss works is really unfortunate. She kind of gets screwed over into not being very useful. Zerda, you could run like a couple of attack skills on her. And I guess Slice Stride might be her best 1C, just because extra crit chance, because she won't have her talent. But she's not going to be doing too much damage. Like, you can put Stinger on her to help ignore defense, but like, assassins are not very high attack. So I wouldn't recommend her. Toguro, if you have been built up, let me see. Yeah, because he's calf movement, he's kind of limited. So he doesn't get to attack in the first turn. And also, just due to the nature of the fight, the way his transform works, like after it's ended, he loses about all his HP. If you don't have a healer who can heal him up, that's a serious problem.
Mm-hmm.
Like, his 3C skill, it requires him to move before battle, and he can't really move. So that's no good. So you'd have to be running like Onrush and Finger Shot. But in general, he's just not... This fight just kind of works out a little bit awkwardly for him, where he'd be an okay DPS but he's not really able to take full advantage of like his transform and stuff like that. All right. The Sage of the Trees is actually kind of interesting here. It's more as a support single target. The issue is, as if you were to use him for AoE, is he only has 3 AoEs, and one of them is his 3-cost skill. So he's not actually able to equip 3 AoEs. So a character like that either needs 2 3 cooldown AoEs to be able to take advantage of the AoE tile going back and forth. And he doesn't have that, so you can't really effectively use him as an AoE DPS. What does make him interesting as a single target is not his single target output, but his ability as a support. So you bring 3C, and that gives like the aura, where there's like 15% reduced range damage, so the boss's AoEs will hurt a little bit less. Now this 30% less chance of being critically hit. Now because the boss has like, well, effectively 100 skill, 10% crit rate. Until this boss builds up to like 300 skill, and it's going to be gaining like 3 skill every turn, it's not going to be able to crit you at all if you're in the effect of this 3C. So it kind of prevents your characters dying to a random crit throughout the entire fight, which is useful and kind of nice. So I would actually be bringing 3C on him, even though I would never be using it in this fight. Now, for the other option, you could sacrifice a turn of his attacking to bring his faction buff. And the reason you would bring his faction buff is if you were using Bozel and Arianrhod, they would both benefit from the 12% damage. So it might actually be worthwhile in that sense, sacrificing a turn of his attack to provide a little bit extra damage buff to Bozel and Arianrhod. Alternately, he could bring this Memories of War. And what that would do is it would increase damage dealt by friendly infantry, lancer, and cavalry units within range. And this would work for like Cav Juggler, and even though Juggler is not Cav here, it does work for his troops. So it would increase his troops' damage dealt. It would increase Burns' damage dealt. It would increase Yulia's damage dealt. Like if I were using like Renata instead of Yulia, Lancer Renata would increase Lancer Renata's damage dealt in battle. So he's sort of interesting as like a support unit that increases your overall team's longevity. The thing is, because Fenrir has such high defenses and they build up quickly, you want all your damage to be dealt like as soon as possible, right away. So increasing longevity in this fight kind of has a lower return than you would get from another Ancient Beckoning boss that has lower defenses, that doesn't build defense as quickly. But if I were to use the Tree Sage, this is how I would be using him. This would be his skill set. Now, if you don't have Juggler and you're looking for another source of like debuffs, Sonya can bring Hellhounds. And she has her unique, which has the fixed damage. So Sonya would actually be a pretty powerful user of the fixed damage tile buff. So if you don't have Juggler and you have to be like running a healer, Sonya might actually be a good choice to have in your party. Now, in terms of healers, I guess I could mention those. You could bring Almeida's not that great as a healer. So I would recommend running Sophia over her. And with Sophia, you would basically go mass heal and rewind. And hopefully you can do the 2-cycle thing. As long as you can do the 2-cycle thing, you can be able to cast mass heal, rewind, and then the boss will be down for a turn, so you won't have to have mass heal up right away. And then the next turn you'll have mass heal back up again. But in general, if you can have juggler, it's much better to have juggler and go full offensive and no healers. I guess in terms of healers, Rosenseal might actually be pretty good as well. Better than Sophia, because she can bring Miracle to give everyone a damage buff. Then Mass Crystal healing to keep people healed up after the AoEs would be pretty good as well. So if I were to bring a healer, it would probably be Rosenseal with this setup. Now, we could talk a little bit about AoE characters. Lambda would be a decent AoE character because she's got some strong AoEs that she can cycle through. Her talent provides some extra damage, and she can bring dwarf troops to also add a little bit more damage to her AoEs. So I don't think she's as good as Bozel, but if you have a 6-star Lambda, you might be able to use that in place of like Varna or Bozel, if you don't have them build up at all, or Arianrhod. Ainz I don't really talk about. The issue with Ainz is, again, he has 3 AoEs, but one of them is his 3C. So he doesn't actually, he's not able to bring 3 AoEs, and his other AoEs don't have low enough cooldown for him to be actually able to go back and forth and always have an AoE up. So that kind of screws Ainz over in this fight. I guess I should mention, actually, I believe Shaltir would be very good in this fight. I just didn't think about her because I haven't really built her at all. But the thing Shaltir can do is she has a passive that allows her to attack twice after having attacked 2 times. Yes, because she has this skill, Blood Frenzy, it allows her to take extra turns more often than Alti gets extra turns. She can bring Armor Pierce, so she can get the minus 30% defense debuff, which would be nice for people with physical AoEs and your other physical-based damage dealers in general. And then she also has it's not this one. Maybe it's the one she starts with. This Purifying Javelin, I'd bring for its lower cooldown as opposed to her 3C. And it also provides Curse of Wounding, so it does provide her with a unique debuff she can give for the even phases. So I believe Shaltir may actually be better than Renata or Altamüller if you have her fully built up. She may actually be a meta single target DPS. I just wasn't thinking about her.
Yeah, it's hard to argue against getting a whole extra attack.
Now, I do want to mention Rean as a single target, but also as an AoE DPS. The thing is, for that, he kind of requires, I believe, Akaya. Because Akaya is the only unit that can get him to, like, transform and stay transformed.
Right.
Like, on her own. And what that would do is it means Rean could bring 3 skills without having to go with the spirit unification.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Rean, there's 2 ways I could see him being built. One of them is as an AoE, and another is as a single target. So, assuming you're using Akaya and Rean together. Akaya, I would probably have her act again, and I would be using not Wild Power. I would be using the Bestial Outbreak. And the idea is you use her because there's wolves. She can get her own wolves back, or I should say, there's like ads in the fight. She can have more summons to be able to sacrifice to trigger Rean's talent. And I would be using Bestial Outbreak so she could occasionally just consume a wolf that way and give someone an act again to do a little bit more damage. And that's going to get Rean triggered up and activated. Now, the thing with Rean is he's actually technically in a way better than Arianrhod. So, Arianrhod, if you look at her, she gets from her talent, she gets 3 stacks, which will give her 15% attack increase and a 15% damage increase. Whereas Rean, once you get Rean going, Rean has a 30% damage increase, so that's a 15% advantage over Arianrhod. And his stacks, he ends up getting up to a 20% stat increase from his stacks. So that's 5% more attack. So he also has like about 30 higher base attack in this class than what Arianrhod gets. And his base skill is fairly high, so he has, like you see, about 300 skill here. That's going to turn into 600 skill. So he's going to have at base about a 60% crit rate, which is really high. So that's going to make him stronger than Arianrhod if you can get him going in that way. But he does have one issue that I kind of don't like about his AoEs. And that is he has this one AoE here that's 3-round cooldown. And then his other 2 big AoEs are like 5 rounds and 6. And one of them is his 3C. So he can't bring both of them, which means he's forced to bring this little 1C AoE. And the issue I have with him as an AoE unit is that this 1C AoE, its damage is only, even when transformed, it's only a 0.15.
Mm-hmm.
Now, compared to Arianrhod, who has a 0.35, if you're forced to go between 0.3 and 0.15, like, that kind of counters him having, like, higher stats and higher damage. Because if you're stuck using this Autumn Leaf Cutter, you're kind of losing out quite a bit. Mm-hmm. It's literally, like, twice as weak as Arianrhod's 0.35, even though Rean's got more damage. So that's kind of why I'm hesitant to say if you could run him with Akaya, he'd be the absolute top tier AoE DPS. Now, it's possible that he still might be better than Bozel. So if you could run him and Arianrhod together with Akaya, that might actually be worthwhile still. But there's another way you can run him, which is actually, instead of an AoE DPS, he might actually be the strongest single target DPS. So in that case, you could run him with Mind's Eye, could run him with Flash and Roar. And in this case, instead of, you could run him with Crystal Stinger. So that's going to give him an extra 10%. So instead of, like, say, 60% crit rate, he'll already be at 70%. And then you can run him with this Mind's Eye, which is going to increase by 15%. So he's already there, got like 85% crit rate. So if you combine that with the Insidious Pendant, he will have 100% crit rate. He will always be hitting crits on his attacks. And he'll be able to spam Flash and Roar pretty often. So I think in addition to potentially being a meta AoE DPS, if you have Akaya in your party, he may also be like a top tier single target DPS as well.
Now, what do you lose by having to include Akaya instead of another character? Or is she fine in her own right?
Let's see, if I were using him as a single target, I would have to have like Bozal and Arianrhod in the party. So from this setup, it looks like I would be dumping Yulia for Akaya. Now with Akaya, I can bring these spider elves to have a decent chance of them providing a debuff. Rean himself, once he's transformed, his talent provides a random debuff. And Mind's Eye, if he's always critting, that's always going to be a passive skill disable. So I think in this setup, you would still have plenty of... Yeah, you would still probably have plenty of debuffs to go around, honestly. Okay. So you're sort of trading out the damage that Yulia provides. But honestly, if Akaya is built up pretty well, she can have this 50% buff. You could probably run her with Reaper. She would probably be a pretty decent DPS, and there's also a chance that you could go maybe attack with her summon as well, and if it doesn't die, you could attack with her summon to add some damage too, and then she can use the act again to take out the summon to trigger Rean, and then that would also give someone else the turn to attack again.
Mm-hmm.
So this could potentially be a new meta party. I'll have to try it later. But it could also be that you would want to run Rean as an AoE unit, in which case, instead of Bozal, you would probably be bringing Yulia. All right, should we talk a little bit now about some things coming down the pipeline?
Sure.
Okay, the first thing I want to mention is in terms of new heroes, we've got Kruger coming out relatively soon. And unfortunately, I can't really show you on my screen. But what Kruger does is he gets damage increases when there's debuffs on enemies. And Fenrir's eating a lot of debuffs, so Kruger gets a lot of damage increase. So he's potentially a Bozal replacement. Now, what you would do with him is you would not bring his 3C. You would bring the Feast of the Night AoE, which is nice because it does not only 0.3 AoE damage, but also gives all your allies like a 10% damage buff. And then besides that, I would also be bringing Dark Dragon Breath and Black Hole. And they're all 5 cooldown AoEs. So basically he would be able to alternate, go to the tile, use an AoE, go to the tile, use an AoE, go to the tile, use an AoE. And then after going to the tile again, like his next AoE is back up, even though they're all 5 cooldowns. He will probably have a bit lower int than what Bozal gets, because Bozal is a conversion character, so you can stack up his magic defense, and then that gets buffed by the AB buff. 1.5 times that gets converted into int. So he might be lower int than Bozal, but with his Feast of the Night AoE, it does provide a damage buff to the rest of the party, which is pretty nice, because it's kind of hard to get like a damage buff on Arianrhod, for example. And also, like, he has his own damage buff from his talent, so he might out-damage Bozal in that sense. So Kruger might be meta instead of Bozal in the future. Now, in terms of single target, There's another new unit coming down the pipeline, and Patsir, I believe is how you pronounce it. I'm not 100% sure on her pronunciation.
Good enough.
But she's not a good AoE unit, but her talent gives her int when fighting against non-female units, and Fenrir is considered a non-female unit. So she can get up to a 30% int buff when attacking. And the thing is, she gives a debuff when she attacks that will give a 20% critical hit rate. So it will increase, in that sense, the chances of your other characters getting crits. So she sort of has a team support in that sense, where she increases your other character's crit rate. Like you saw how crazy Arianrhod was with that 400k crit. She would make that more likely. So I think, like in the standard team I showed before, I would be replacing Yulia with Patsir, perhaps. But I think that's it in terms of potential meta characters. One other character that I will mention who has something else coming down the pipeline is Licorice. Now, Licorice has a unique helm coming down the pipeline that reduces cooldowns of her skills when she doesn't attack. And what that means is you can use her 3C transform, not her 3C transform, her 1C transform, along with her 3C in Dark Dragon Breath. And they're both 5 cooldown AoEs, but they're always going to come back because she's going to attack with her AoE, then she's going to retreat to the tile, and then she's going to have an extra turn of cooldown. Then she can go to the AoE again, and then she could go back, have an extra turn of cooldown, and that means that her other AoE is going to be back up. So she'll be usable as an AoE DPS unit in this fight. The issue that she runs into is that her base int is kind of low.
Right.
Like even in her dark class, she only has like 509 base int. But the interesting thing is because she converts let's look at her. Like she has a base healing increase by 20%, and her transform turns all her healing increase effects to damage effects. So what you could do is run her with like a healing staff, a healing accessory, Twilight Guard, Crystal Enchant, and soldiers as bishops. And that basically means that even though her base int is kind of low, she'll have like a plus 90% damage increase on her AoEs. So she might be doing crazy damage right at the start. So she'll drop off faster than Bozo will. But I am going to test with her just to see what her output is, because her output should be crazy towards the beginning. Because 90% damage is no joke. Now, it's possible as well that instead of running her as an AoE, that damage increase is also going to apply to her soldiers. So she might be runnable as a single target DPS, even though her Sorks only have a 20% attack boost in her bond. You can still run her with Crystal and get that like 90% damage increase. And then just run her as a single target DPS who can also bring mass heal. So what this means is that you can have her as a single target DPS, and once you get to the point where it's sort of hard to attack with your units because they're all half dead, even after jugglers healed people from the AoE, she can bring a mass heal to help people sustain for longer in that situation, and maybe get through a couple more phases that way. So she, with the new helm, might be potentially usable in that way as well. So I'm going to be testing that once her new helm comes out.
It sounds like you have a few units to build and test.
Yep. And I think that about covers all the units that I wanted to cover.
Nice.
I don't think there's really anyone else coming down the pipeline for Dark or Mythic. I guess there is Kyura, who would be sort of like a supportive single target damage dealer. But I don't really see her as being that meta. So I think that covers just about everything there is to cover for Fenrir.
Pardon the interruption. Qtaru later told me that he changed his mind on Kyura's potential meta impact. Assuming he's not mistaken and her assassin class gets to wear assassin gear, she can use her 1-cost Teleport After Battle skill to consistently hit your AoE units with a King's Crown buff while they're waiting on the buff tile. It previously wasn't possible to keep them buffed up consistently like that. Plus, her talent provides some extra healing to herself and the other lowest HP unit, which will help a little bit with sustain. Okay, back to class.
Okay, the only thing I can think of to mention is once my burn becomes 6 stars, maybe once I have SP ulti, I'll be able to cycle the boss for a bit longer, and I kind of expect to be able to reach like 21, 22, maybe 23 million on this boss at that point. So that's the sort of high score I'm aiming for, is like 22, 23 million.
Nice.
Eventually.
Well, we'll have to see that in action when it comes to pass.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for watching, I guess. I know Kong doesn't say like and subscribe very much, so I'm saying it for him. Remember to hit the remember to subscribe and hit that notification bell, blah blah blah.
Thanks, YouTuber Qtaru.
You're welcome.
And thanks Ancient Beckoning Guru Qtaru for coming on and giving us the full breakdown on our favorite wolf. Alright, so that concludes our video on Fenrir. Please join me in the comments in thanking Professor Qtaru for that amazingly detailed and thorough lesson. I know it might not seem like it, but we both did put a lot of hard work into this episode and the series as a whole. Like Qtaru just said, I don't usually do this, but I do hope in this instance you'll consider liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and maybe even clicking the join button for information on the perks of channel membership. It really does go a long way to help us keep cranking out quality videos like this. Thanks again so much for watching. I hope you took something valuable from this, and I hope you'll be back for the next lesson. Happy leaderboarding, everyone.